Okay, welcome back in our next video in our series on medical terminology. In this video, we'll focus on chapter number 2, Understanding Suffixes. First, the learning objectives for this chapter. Define and spell the suffixes often used in medical terminology. Identify suffixes in medical terms. Use suffixes to build medical terms that pertain to medical specialties, symptoms, and diseases. Alright, getting started with suffixes. Now, a suffix is a word part that is attached to the end of a word root. And anytime you add something to the beginning of a word root or the end of a word root, you're going to change the meaning of that term. So anytime you add a suffix or prefix, you're going to change that meaning somehow. Alright, here are some very common suffixes. And one thing you'll notice, if you haven't noticed from the first video, there are several suffixes that have the same meaning. And it's one of those things where you just have to know what that term is a reference to. Such as the first two, al and ik. Both of those suffixes mean in pertaining to. So abdominal references the abdomen. Ik, like thoracic, references the thoracic cavity. So even though they're two separate suffixes, they both have the same meaning. They both mean pertaining to. Itis means inflammation of. Logi means the study of. Cardiology, study of the heart. Pulmonology, study of the lungs. A meter means to measure. A barometer measures air pressure. A glucometer measures glucose or blood sugar levels. See, os also means pertaining to, just like AL and IC. Apathy, talked about this in the first video, is reference to disease. Alright, the next two, scope and scopy, are related, but they don't mean the same thing. Scope is an instrument used to view something, such as a microscope. It's used to view something very small. And scopy is the process of viewing. Alright, for example, if you were to add the suffix scopy to the root word lepero, lepero means the abdomen, and scopy means the process of viewing. So add those together, you get laparoscopy, which is the process of viewing the abdomen. Root word, lapare actually, then adding the combining vowel o, they get laparo, and then scopy, laparoscopy. And there's an image of how that actually looks, a laparoscopy. A surgical procedure where you are using a laparoscope, which is a long tube that has a camera on one end, so you're able to see the internal organs without having to be more invasive. Alright, some suffixes that indicate an action or a state. The suffix drome means the process of running together. These are where symptoms go together. The emesis, that's a reference to vomiting. If you've ever been in a doctor's office and you think you're going to be sick, and they give you a very small basin that's shaped kind of like a kidney, and is usually way too small than what it is intended for. That's an emesis basin. It's a basin used to collect vomit. The malacia means the softening. So osteomalacia is the softening of the bones. Osteo is reference to bones. The opsy means the view of. So a biopsy, you're taking a view of a living sample, because bio means living. Oxia is reference to oxygen, usually for the levels of oxygen. So if you are suffering from hypoxia, hypo means below or less than. So those are lower than normal oxygen levels. Phil or philia means attracted to or loving. So the city name of Philadelphia, the reason why it's known as the city of brotherly love, that's how that word translates, Philadelphia. See, next two, very easy to mispronounce them either way and get them completely wrong. The first one, phasia, is a reference to swallowing or eating. And the second one, phasia, where the S sounds more like a Z, phasia, is a reference to speech. The physis is a reference to growing. The plasia is a reference to paralysis. Someone who suffers from quadriplegia, or is a quadriplegic, is paralyzed in all four limbs. Quad means four. Plegia means paralysis. So paralysis in four limbs. Oma is a reference to a tumor or a mass. So anytime you hear the word oma, is usually a reference to cancer also. Melanoma, lymphoma, carcinoma. Those are all references to the tumors. Stasis is a reference to stopping a process. So whenever you are cut and you are bleeding, the process of stopping that bleeding is hemostasis. Hemo is a reference to blood. Stasis means to stop. Algia is a reference to pain. Asthenia is a reference to the lack of strength, usually a reference to muscles and how strong or how weak they are. Atresia, this is a reference to either the absence or the closure of a normal body opening, usually a tube of some kind, such as the fallopian tubes, for example. They normally should be open, but when they are closed for some reason, or they are not open at all, you would use the suffix atresia. The next one, seal, that's a reference to a hernia. And the last one on the slide, dynia, is also a reference to pain. And going back to the suffix here, seal, if you were to add that to the root word meningo, meningo means membrane, such as the meninges that cover the brain and spinal cord. So if you have a meningoceal, you actually have a hernia on one of those membranes that protect the spinal cord and the brain. And this is how that would look. You have an illustration of a child born with spina bifida. So what you have here is the most inferior part of the spinal cord, the lumbar portion, will be exposed to the external environment, a herniation of the spinal cord and of the meninges. So you have a meningoceal. These suffixes that indicate a condition or a disease. Alright, the first one, IA, is a reference to a general condition. The next one, osis, also is a reference to a condition, but usually means an abnormal condition. The ism is a reference to a process. The itis is a reference to inflammation. The oma, again we talked about this earlier, reference to a tumor or a mass of cells. Pathy references a disease. Penia is a reference to a deficiency. So the condition of erythropenia. Eryth is a reference to red blood cells. So erythropenia would be a deficiency in the number of red blood cells. See, phobia, that means a fear of or being afraid of. So hydrophobia, being a fear of water. Plasia is a reference to development, usually in a number of cells. So if you have hyperplasia, you have a higher than normal amount of cells developing. Be careful not to confuse plasia here with two terms we talked about earlier, phasia and phasia. See, next one, hemorrhagia. That's a reference to bursting forth, usually with a bursting of a blood vessel. Urea is a reference to a discharge or a flowing of material, such as diarrhea, for example. Orexis means a rupture. Sclerosis means a hardening. That can mean anything from vessel or a structure in general. And last one on here is spasm. This is a sudden contraction of muscle tissue. Alright, some suffixes that indicate a location or a number or a quality. The first one, ad, that means going toward. The next two go together because they are a reference to Latin terms. The ending of just the letter A is usually a reference to one item. If it ends in AE, it's usually a reference to more than one. That's a pluralized form of this. So terms that end in Latin, you won't just add an S to them. To make it Latin, you will add an E. So for example, the bones in your spinal column are called vertebra. So if you're talking about one of those bones, you're talking about a vertebra. It would end with the letter A. If you're talking about more than one of those bones, you're talking about vertebrae. It would end with AE. So you don't just add an S to Latin terms to make it plural. That just goes back to the Latin origins, Latin and Greek origins of a lot of our terms. Emia and hemia both mean conditions of the blood. And now we'll focus on this term here, emia. If you were to add that to the root word glyso, and also add the prefix hypo, you add those all together to make one big constructed term. Hypo means low, glyco means sugar, and of course emia, condition of the blood. So if you add all those together, hypoglycemia, the condition of having low blood sugar. And so every term on this slide, ac or al or r or airy or ic or os, every term on here means exactly the same thing. They all mean pertaining to. It all depends on the word root that these suffixes get attached to. And these are things you just have to be able to recognize with experience and over time. Alright, suffixes that indicate a medical specialty. The first one, iatry, as a reference to medical treatment. Someone who practices psychiatry, for example, will deal with the medical treatment of the psyche or the mind. Logist, a logist, this is someone that is involved with the study of a root word, such as a cardiologist is someone who specializes in the field of cardiology. And the suffix logi is a reference to the study of. So cardiology is the study of the heart. So the suffixes logi and logis will be very interconnected. And the suffix practic is a reference to the use of. So for example, a chiropractor. Chiro means using the hands. So a chiropractor breaks down into someone who uses their hands to heal. Alright, suffixes that indicate a procedure or treatment. Synthesis, this is the withdrawal of a body fluid, such as amniocentesis, the taking out of amniotic fluid when a woman is pregnant to do medical testing. See the next three, clasia, clasis, and clast all mean the same thing. They all mean to break. Desis is reference to binding together or sticking together. An ectomy is the surgical removal of a structure. So an appendectomy, the surgical removal of the appendix. No, tonsillectomy, the surgical removal of the tonsil. So another example with the suffix ectomy, if you add that to the root word thyroid, of course thyroid or thyroido was a reference to the thyroid gland. So you add those two together, you get thyroidectomy, the surgical removal or excision of the thyroid gland. And here's how that would look. Thyroidectomy, a portion of the thyroid gland is removed in this procedure. Alright, the next three that are listed here, gram, graph, and graphy, are all very related, and they're all often confused with one another because they mean very similar things, but they are not interchangeable terms. They all mean three individual separate definitions. The first one, gram, is an actual recording, so the actual results of a test. So a mammogram is a results of that test. Electrocardiogram is the actual readout of that testing procedure. Alright, the next one, graph, this is the actual instrument that's used to do that recording. So an electrocardiograph will create a electrocardiogram as a result. So graph is the actual instrument, gram is the actual results of that testing procedure. And the third one, graphy, is a whole process of recording. So one references the actual procedure, the overall procedure, graphy. Graph is the actual instrument that's used, and then gram are the actual results that are produced from that procedure. The next one, meter, is this to measure. I mentioned that earlier in the video. Metry is the process of measuring. And last term on the slide, pexy, means the surgical fixation, fixating one structure to another. See, phylaxis means protection. Some medications, such as formularia, for example, you take prior to traveling to an area that is common for malaria, so you would take a prophylactic medication. Plasty is a surgical repair of. So a rhinoplasty would be the repair of the nose. A raphy, or a suffix that references a suture. And next two are interrelated also, but they're not the same thing. Scope and scopy. Scope is the actual instrument used for viewing, such as a microscope, and the scopy is the actual process of viewing. So for example, a gastroplasty is a surgical repair of the stomach. Now, gastro is reference to the stomach, and plasty means the surgical repair of. And this is an example of how you would reduce the volume that the stomach can hold as an effort to lose weight. Alright, see the next one, stomy, is a reference to a new opening in the body. Now, stoma is a reference to an opening, so the suffix stomy is the creation of a new opening. See the next one, tome, the suffix means, or is a reference to an instrument of cutting. See the next one, tomy, is related to a tome, but it means to make an incision or to cut into something. A tracheotomy is a cutting into of the trachea. Tripsy is a reference to crushing. You usually hear this when someone talks about kidney stones. They go through a process to get rid of those stones. It's called lithotripsy. Litho means stone, and then of course tripsy means to crush. So the process literally means to crush the kidney stone. And last one on this page, ion, means a process. Alright, here we have a quick quiz on the suffixes that we talked about in this video. Al, opsy, itis, gram, and graphy. And they'll be matched to either a record or image, or pertaining to, or inflammation, recording process, or a view of. So the first one, al, means pertaining to. Opsy means the view of. Itis means inflammation. Gram means a record or an image, the results of that procedure. Graphy means the recording process. So here are the results of the results of matching the suffix to the correct definition. Again, just like we mentioned in the first video, there are countless other combinations, countless other suffixes that we can go over. It'd be nearly impossible to mention every single one that's out there. But these ones that we covered here in this video are very, very common ones that you'll see over and over and over again. Alright, that brings us to the end of our second video in a medical terminology course. We will continue our course with our video on chapter number 3.